stop switch. Feels like that one never happened. Right, it's 9:30 and we got 2 papers, Victor. Nice, well done. Thanks for preparing. Welcome to Neuroccino. This is a weekly journal club online, open to everyone. Welcome to come and bring a paper, quickly present it, tell us why you're excited about it, and then we have a chat about the paper. Right, should we just make a start? Any preference? Any one of you wants to go first? I can hear the volunteers screaming. Victor. Like, ooh.
Okay. All right, so let me share my screen.
Good morning, Michelle.
This is it. All right, so can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this was a paper that was kindly pointed to me by Steffi, because I did not have a paper, but I should have, because I did not have one last week. Anyway, so it's an interesting paper about the statistics, at least a starting guide about retest statistics used in fMRI, and a bit of a presentation about what is the state of retest in fMRI studies, and how to use these kind of tests, and why there is a problems and why it should be improved. So first, barely had the time to go through it. It's interesting because it's more it starts by giving a broad presentation about the statistics, the statistics behind this kind of test, with the introduction explaining that the most used model is what is called ICC, for intra-class correlation coefficient. It is a kind of correlation coefficient. Well, it's in the name. It's like a correlation that is taking into account the variability between subject and intra-subject to try to model this kind of variability, and to take it into account in the test that you are running, and to just try to see the what was the terms, because they used very specific terms, the consistency and the validity of your tests, and to quantify it. So there are the most used test is the ICC commonly denoted with two different letters, variable n and k, that are variables that are used to set the model, because it's obviously you use a statistic model to determine the type of statistics you want to run. It depends on what kind of data you have, what kind of test you want to run. And so there are, for the end, there is 3 that are possible. If you use one, it's for when you have what they call an absolute agreement, and it's when you do not take into account any source of error in your test. You just say they have to be the same. Well, assume that they are all the same and they should be the same, well, at least within subject. The ICC2 with the n equal 2 is when you add a random effect inside. So this is the most broad one that you can run that is the most conservative, I'd say. And there is the ICC with n equal 3 is when you have multiple fixed and potentially known source of error. And so what they say a bit later is that when you're not really sure about what you're doing, well, at least not what you are supposed to use, it's better to use the ICC2 because it's more conservative. But then there is also the number number k that you have to run. It's if I understood correctly, related to the number of observation you have. So I guess the number of retests you have on the subject. I'm not completely sure because, to be honest, it's I went through it quite quickly, and the part that are more specific to the statistics, I think it's a good introduction, but you need to have a bit more background to fully take it in. It's really it's linked to a lot of different other papers, so yeah, it's a good start, I think, if you want to get to it, but it's quite short for when you have absolutely no prior knowledge on this thing, like I did. But I think it should be, when you do this kind of statistic, you have to start somewhere, and it's a good paper to start with. So yeah, they also give like the rule of thumb historical values that you can have with the FCC with the ICC. Like if it's under 4, there is a poor. It's a poor value. It's between 0.4 and 0.6. It's okay. 0.6 and 0.74, it's good, and above 0.75, it's excellent. So yeah, it's always good to have this kind of value, because when you start, you don't know exactly what you're supposed to have, and yeah, that's great. So then they go on with a few recommendations. Well, a few things to consider when you start to run an ICC. I won't go too much into details because the article is a lot like a list of different things to take into account and to be aware of. So it would be a bit tedious to run you through all of it, but I quite encourage you to read it if you are doing retest analysis. So yeah, the last part is more about the where we are with the more specifically the fMRI studies and the different reliability and of test retest studies. Well, they are listing once again here, for example, on these multiple paragraphs, what are the studies that have the best and the worst kind of reliability with these retests. For example, here they say it's better, well, the one with on task activation studies, block is better than event-related designs, target, non-target better than task rest contrasts, etc., etc. So yeah, that's, well, it's hard for me to summarize everything. So I think I'll I'll end up by just saying that it's not a long read, but it is it's the start of a long one if you want to fully understand the topic. And I really encourage you, if you're using this, to start by this one. It's I think it's a great introduction to the field.
Thank you, Victor. Any questions?
Okay.
Michelle?
All right. Yeah, thank you for this. It's very interesting. Do you think, is there like any code that like allow us to do this intra-class correlation coefficient and that is available, or do we have to code it ourselves?
I did not see it, but I'm sure there are libraries that are available online. Python libraries pretty much, or well, R libraries, I'm almost sure, but I don't use much R. Python, there are more and more statistic libraries available, so I assume there are, but I've not seen the presentation of anything in this article about the.
Okay. Question number 2 is for your paper, which is actually in bioarchive, we use cross correlation. Do you think with intra-class cross correlation, we would have shown a higher reproducibility of fMRI?
I'm not sure. The thing is, the cross correlation usually gives gives a better value because it does not take into account, as they say, the scaling of some effects. For example, it does not change if there is a linear relationship between a measurement and another. But this kind of tests will change if there is a linear relationship. It will not change if they are a translational relationship. So basically, it will correlation will not change if you have a relationship. For example, ax plus y, but this one it will change for this, but will not change if it's a relationship x plus y. I don't know if I'm clear, but it's
I see. So
yeah.
Which one would you recommend?
Well, if we have to be honest and have a good something that is recognized as the test that is supposed to be done with test retest, we should use this kind of statistics. But I'm not completely well, I just discovered it, so I'm not completely sure about everything about it.
Thank you. Leah.
Okay. No, thank you, Victor, for the paper. And when you were saying that there was like a parameter that can take into account like some noise factor, if I didn't understood
yes.
well, I was thinking, so this kind of approach should be used only for test retest within the same scanner, the same sequence, or is also something that we can use like between to compare different sequences, or is beyond the scope? Like if we can find a correlate to see like how much they differ, can we use this also for that or no?
Yeah, sure. Actually, they talk about the different scanner, different sites, and this kind of thing. I don't remember exactly what they were telling about.
Okay, so it's possible. I was I think it was something that I was thinking, or
no, it's interesting. They also say that there is a whole paragraph, a small paragraph about this thing, and also the harmonization between scanners and stuff, and they send to other references to say, okay, if you want to do this, do that, check this paper. So it's good because they talk about a lot of different things, but just briefly and link to the paper that you can go on to investigate more about it.
Okay, so I will have a look, because it's really interesting that you have an instrument to compare the similarity or the agreement. Between also in the fMRI, that you have like a lot of noise factors related to the sequence and everything that can be different. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. Any more questions? No. I have a quick question for you, Victor, and I appreciate that you read the paper briefly, but you mentioned that block design studies are better than event-related designs. Is that in terms of reliability, or is that a general rule from this paper?
Oh, no, it's well, let's just look at what they say. It shows that that reliability has been shown to improve for block rather than event-related designs. That's exactly what they say. They don't go further. It's just one of the list of things that they say. Okay, you have to be careful about these kind of things, and if you want to improve this and that, there are papers saying that. And here it's just say that reliability has been shown greater for block design rather than event related, and that's it. There's not much more about it. I mean, they link to the article, so we can still go and see further about it, but yeah.
Yeah, our fMRI expert, so I'll let you dig into it.
Okay.
Right, if there's no further questions, we move on to the next paper. Leah, if you want to share your screen, over to you.
So okay, can you see him? I think yes, it's highlighted. Okay. So this is the paper. Again, I am curious about this visual hallucinations process in our brain. And there was this paper published in Cortex last week by Timothy Lone and Dominic Seitz. And so I was curious, and I read about that. And this time we are focusing in Parkinson's disease and the Charles-Bonnet syndrome. So, like as we have seen also in the paper I presented last week, hallucinations can be present, especially in the neurodegeneration disease. And in the Charles-Bonnet syndrome is a clinical state when you have it's nicely described in this paper in introduction, when you have eyes impairment. They say here related to like in the visual pathway, it can be related to different causes, also, like for example after a stroke, or here in the study the patients have age-related macular degeneration, so an eye disease related to these retinal part degenerations, and as a consequence of this impairment in your visual pathways, you can have hallucinations. In fact, here, when they sum up the hypothesis that and they previously investigated studies on this field, they say that somehow if you have a differentiation, I can pronounce that, of the visual, like in the path and the connection to the visual cortex, the cortex can be more like hyper excitated, and so you can have these visions that are not actually there. And usually these visions are like simple visions, so dots, colors, shapes, and so this is typical of the Charles-Bonnet syndrome. On the contrary, like in Parkinson's disease, you have more like a shape passing in the background, in your visual periphery, a feeling of a presence, tactile and auditory experience. These are typical of the Parkinson's disease, and so different features, even if they can have in common also like complex hallucinations where you can see people, animal, objects. It's really nice here in the paper that they actually reported all the hallucinations that the patients had to give you like an idea of the variety, as also Michelle was asking last week, that can be like really like different. Here you have for each patient like a huge table where you can really have the feeling of this of the content of the hallucination. And they can be like house, they can be related to house, animals, glimmering glass, colors, sometimes the walls or words on a screen, and the lights of print, white oars. They can be like, there is like a huge variety. Caterpillars, text, chicken is something that was in a different patients, cats. These are the chat bonnet one, or in the Parkinsonian, you can have also faces, figures, bears, head, again, people, animals, faces, cat. So both animal, people, or like objects related to houses. And in the case of the Parkinson's disease, the hypothesis behind the hallucination manifestation is related to like a dysfunctional integration between the attentional network, in particular the dorsal one, and the visual perception. So like a kind of dysfunctional integration, like of attention and visual inputs. And the novelty of this paper is that they focused their MRI investigation on the cerebellum, because there was also another study related to schizophrenia where they found significant differences in the cerebellum in patients who were like reported pharmacos-resistant hallucinations, so they were like consistent in time, and they found significant differences in the cerebellum. In particular, in this paper, they also used the sweet voxel-based morphometry, that is an SPM tool focused on the cerebellum. So you mask the cerebellum, and then you do the comparison, voxel-based, using T1 images on the gray matter and the white matter. And this approach is designed to be really precise in the location and so in the registrations between subject and a study group. And you can also like investigate and correct manually the mask that they're using, so you can overcome some issues related to this segmentation. So this tool is really designed to have the most precise possible classification and comparison between patients, subjects in the cerebellum. And then they compared. So in this, the study group was is not really, it's a sizable group, 21 patients, in which 16 were Parkinson's disease. And so you have this group of about 20 patients, then is divided in Parkinson's disease and Charles-Bonnet syndrome. And then you split again in patients within each group who have hallucination and who not reported any hallucination process. And so here you have 12 patients of the Charles-Bonnet syndrome who reported hallucination, and 7 Parkinson's disease who reported hallucination. So this was the data set. And going to the results, here you have reported the t-values of the statistics of comparing the gray matter between patients, so hallucination with non-hallucination, mixing up the two groups. And as you can see here, there are more in the 8 and 7 lobus of the cerebellum, and also in the crus one. And here we have a more extended part on the right side. And if you then split to the Parkinsonian and Charles-Bonnet, the difference was here in the crus one, where we have less gray matter in patients, and in particular more in the Parkinsonian disease. And then if you then look to the analysis, focusing on the white matter, they found a significant difference, so a loss of white matter in the medulla. And again, this was driven by the Parkinsonian disease group. And then they also compared if there was the correlations of regions reported gray matter atrophy and also white matter volume loss. And they found really good correlations. Here is reported in the 8 lobular hemisphere cluster in the left cerebellum. Here you can see patients, so PD without with hallucination, and Charles-Bonnet syndrome, and or only the eyes impairment disease. And in particular, they say that when you have hallucination, you are in this part of the scatter plot. And so you have both. There is an agreement of gray matter loss and white matter loss. Instead, you have this agreement also when you're not presented hallucination, but is driven here. So there is this consistent when you have hallucinations. And here, as I was saying, is more in the Parkinson disease group here in the medulla. And they discussed the results, reporting the study presenting the literature about these hypotheses on these dysfunctional attention network correlations with the visual processing. And actually there are studies supporting these hypotheses, and also it seems that also the crus one can be also related to this attention to motion paradigm. And so this is maybe the reason why it was more present in the Parkinson group, supporting this different mechanism that is driven hallucination in the two patients group. And yes, there is also this hypothesis, but it's like explorative about a possible background in the serotonin system that can be related to the infratensorial gray matter and white matter loss. And they again reported this study on schizophrenia, where they found a similar distribution, I think in the 8 cerebellum lobes when there was like gray matter loss, yes, in the 7 and 8 cerebellum lobe. And so they will say that it seems that the cerebellum is like has a role in this process and also in the different pathologies. And also they are curious about the Charles-Bonnet syndrome. What will happen if we investigate the cerebellum, for example, in another condition, so visual loss after a stroke or cerebrovascular diseases. And of course, the limitation of these studies are the sizable group. It was a retrospective study. And it will be like nice to see in a longitudinal perspective the relationship between these gray matter loss and white matter loss. They seems to be consistent. And this study was in 1.5 Tesla. This in schizophrenia was 3 Tesla, I think. So maybe a better signal statistic, but is again like a confirmation that the cerebellum can have a role in this hallucination process, and also is really nicely written. I will recommend you this paper. It was really nice to read it. And yes, this was the paper. If you have any question, I try to answer.
Thank you, Leah. Any questions?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
Can I?
Yeah.
So it's so interesting. And I have so many questions actually, but I limit myself just to 2 questions. So the paper shows the anatomical difference within the cerebellum between Parkinson's disease and Charles-Bonnet syndrome patients. And I was wondering, is this different related to some symptoms manifestation difference? Which is the clinical, like the differences in the hallucination pattern, for instance, between Parkinson's disease and Charles-Bonnet syndrome patients? Why did they choose these 2 patients group?
Okay, so actually there were differences like in the Cruz one and more driven in the medulla atrophy, but there was also like a wide overlap between the gray matter loss. So like here in this figure, you can see like the 2 conditions, and actually it's really similar where they have like a gray matter loss. In particular here in this ventral part of the cerebellum. So actually they are consistent. So they are, when they show these results, they are putting together Parkinson's disease and Charles-Bonnet who didn't present hallucination versus the hallucinations one. So there are differences, but here they are more focused on the similarity. Indeed, they choose these 2 different groups because there are like, I can say, solid different hypotheses about the process behind what driven hallucinations. And but they found the same involvement in the cerebellum, that can mean that there is a common process there, but also some differences. For example, in the Cruz one, that can be more related on the dorsal attention network, and they try to see if there was a correlation with the Parkinsonian index, but there was not here. And they didn't have a scale for somehow quantify hallucinations, and because it was this was a retrospective study again, so maybe I don't know, in psychology, maybe you know better than me, if there are some scales that can quantify in like in a uniform way hallucination content. Here they just report everything and say that they know that there are differences. So Charles-Bonnet syndromes can have more simple hallucinations against like the shape in the background periphery for the Parkinsonians, but here they reported like what they have in common, so the complex one.
Okay. And I have another question, because I know you met Charcot patients, right? Charcot syndrome patient. And I was wondering, as I know that some Parkinsonian patients have problems with their awareness of their symptoms. And I was wondering whether Charcot syndrome patients are aware of the hallucinations. Like,
I think
do they think
are. I think they are, but I don't have like a clinical experience for this. I just have an experience of one patient, and I think he was aware because, for example, when you are taking a part of a study, they trigger your hallucinations. So, and you have it, and then you reported that, and also in the investigation here, they report the context of the hallucinations, so you are actually aware because they are so frequent. I think that then you understand that they are not reality, but I don't really, I don't have a clinical experience for that. I'm just reading these papers, and yeah, I was thinking that there is also an answer of what Stephanie was asking me last week, and here they say that also on the 10 and 15% of the general population, you have these hallucinations that are not identifiable, like so related to one specific cause. There was a question for last week. So I think they are, for the answer, I think they are aware of this, but, and also like in the schizophrenia paper, I briefly read the abstract. They say they are drug resistant. So actually you try to treat this condition that can be a problem for patients. So you are aware if you are trying and investigating and reporting these, and maybe, I don't know, maybe in an early stage where clinicians have to ask more, so maybe to classify these patients, if they are not aware, so maybe you try to ask or do some tests. I don't know if there are some tests for hallucination. Are they?
I mean, there are some standards question on awareness for patients, and maybe you can like play around with the questionnaires and see whether they are aware. But I have no experience with schizophrenia patients, so I'm not sure.
Yes, I think that you are aware of this process if they are so common. So maybe you can, maybe if they are like sporadic manifestation, maybe you say, I don't know, I was like dreaming, I don't know, but it's like an hypothesis. I don't have a clinical experience for this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle?
Yeah, so like Dominic Fitch has this theory of like hyperconnectivity being linked with visual hallucination. How does it reconcile what's going on in the cerebellum with this hyperconnectivity theory? I know he's an excellent writer, so I imagine there might be somewhere in the discussion. Did you see it, or did it didn't mention?
Actually, it was more related the discussion of the attention network because they were focusing to explain these differences between the two conditions, the Parkinsonian one and the Charles-Bonnet. In the cerebellum, it seems that the cerebellum seems to be involved in a lot of things and not only motor processing. So also they said again also in the discussion about language, emotion, perception. So maybe also in this in the visual part, they say at some point that in the cerebellum the dorsolateral is more related to spatial spatial tasks, and the ventrolateral is more visual and working memory task. They focus on this involvement of vision and working memory. So and then the connection with attention network, but also in the dysfunctional integration with the cortex. So they really focused on the attention network and these different parts of the cerebellum related to the visual part. So here about the attention network, here the cruise one again for attention. Here I was saying the dorsomedial is more in the spatial aspect of task, in the ventrolateral, where they found the significant differences in the visual working memory. The serotonin system was more, so maybe this was the hypothesis, this integration with the serotonin system that can be related to gray matter and white matter loss in the cerebellum. So maybe this can have a link with both. So PD and eye disease, maybe this could be like something that is behind the both conditions, but they say that is like an exploratory hypothesis. So it's not like really directly connected. And here is another condition. So maybe the answer it was here in the serotonin system, but is really like at an initial stage. Yes, and they also talk about the caudal raphe nuclei and this integration, but I really did. It seems like really an explorative hypothesis, and then the correlation. So maybe it was here. Well, where are they trying to answer the question you were asking? So yeah. But I really, I read that, but I'm not, I don't know about I don't really know about the sorting system. And they also like said that there is also sometimes so a genetic correlation that you can have with these findings that can be related to psychosis. And they try to link these correlations also with the cerebellum. That is just a functional link. And in this maybe caudal raphe nuclei like a role of this in this system, but I think it's difficult to test it. They were like a bit caution in explaining that.
Michelle, you didn't sound convinced just there. What are you thinking?
I need to read the discussion to reconcile everything.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I have a slight naive question. Yeah, I was wondering, there is a mention about attentional dysfunction with visual areas in other areas in the brain. What appears that the individual should be attending to the hallucination, certainly, so that they can recall it at the later point of time. And is it a dysfunction really, or is it some other fault which is in the brain, in the processing? Because what I really think that without attending to the stimuli or without attending to what you're seeing, you won't be able to report it or register. It's something like dreaming, and I see colors, pictures, and I'm flying, but I won't be able to, if I'm not attending, I wouldn't be able to register. That's one point. And also, I just wanted to ask, if did we have ever tested the patients with schizophrenia or with Parkinson's at the in the lab where we check for the brain states they are in when they hallucinate, or for something like that? So checking for this brain states when they are hallucinating. Do we have any studies like that?
Oh, Okay, so for the first question, so you were saying that maybe if they have like loss in attention, they will not be aware of this manifestation of the hallucination process. This was the question.
Yeah.
So for answer to that, they did the mini mental state to see, so they were just reported this and say that they were not I think different. So they were like study the mini mental state for that. Actually, maybe seems lower for the Chasponnet. They so they haven't a measure, maybe because it was a retrospective study, so they have not a measure for the attention, as you said that there was maybe a test, but it was, I think it is really interesting. Maybe there are other studies, maybe prospective studies that investigate that. Here they just command the mini mental score to see if they were like able to report these hallucinations, or they were not maybe aware given by a mini mental state. And for the second question, it was if comparing the PD versus the Chasmonnet. No, what did it asking?
It was like
schizophrenia.
Yeah.
I don't know actually if there are studies that comparing these two groups, because for what I was reading in the discussion, in the different study, of course, you focus on a disease. Indeed, here in this paper, it was interesting because they're trying to mix different pathology and to see if there were like differences or not. And again, sometimes maybe you try to trigger hallucination, like for example with the task, you can use like a bell for auditory stimulation, or like the test K, how you call the board, where you have like a lot of visual input that they are changing color, that can trigger hallucinations. So in the content of a task fMRI, maybe you study so hallucination in the scanner, but you need to trigger these hallucinations with these visual or auditory input.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we do know at what state the brain is, like what is it at the gamma state or alpha state? Yeah. So because if we could compare it with a situation where we know that at certain states the brain is more attentional based and can attend to the stimuli, and at some other states we are not. For example, during this dreaming state, or when we are going to sleep.
Yeah.
So do we have any data which says what state the brain is at the functional level, and how it is interacting?
I don't know. I haven't read the study about that, but I think that is something that is feasible. Also, if you're using like an AG monitoring of patients, I know about epilepsy, but maybe you can apply that also in the Parkinsonian disease, or even better, if you use there are integrated AG and fMRI system that you can use at the same time in the scanner, so you can trigger hallucination and measure both the fMRI and the AG. Of course, you have a lot of noise for the gel cap and everything, but you can there are some new instruments, new tools for doing that. So I have to look to start if there were studies about that. They were not reporting the discussion about the AG, but it's something that is feasible. I think that if people want to investigate this process, we have the instruments for doing that. Also to see what you were saying that is interesting, if there is like a change in the state.
Whether we really go to a different state at that moment when you are hallucinating, and also it will help us to rule out whether the attentional hypothesis, because if we are instead of asking them question later on whether you can remember, and we know that patients tend you cannot rely on the memory aspect, whether they really were attending at that moment, or it is just the failure of memory at that after a point of time, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I said that it's really interesting also in comparing these patients, how they maybe the EEG recording is during sleep, if there are some similarities, like because they also don't, like some patients, I know, like what's the name of it? In narcolepsy, that you have these dreams that seem so real, so it's like an hallucination in the dream, and they have these prisons. They really woke up because they think that the dream was real, and so it's really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Lovely discussion. Are there any more questions? No, doesn't seem like it. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for bringing those two papers this week. And I wish you an exciting week in science, and hopefully see you next Monday morning again. Have a good week.
Bye.